Imagine yourself sweating and writhing, while horns blare and high-pitched pipes screech in your ears. Through half-closed eyelids, you glimpse a grimy and bruised-looking figure spinning, then stumbling to the ground, while other bodies shake to relentless drum beats under the scorching sun. Your feet are burning, and pain shoots up the length of your spine with every step. But you can't stop. It's as if a drug, or worse, some unholy spirit has taken over your body and compelled you to keep moving. Even if you could remove yourself from this scene, where would you go? Perhaps you could collapse on the cool stone floor of the church, under the disapproving stares of the local clergy, while the town physicians argue about how to cure you. You're wearing through the soles of the only shoes you have. Things are not looking good. It's 1518, and you're in the midst of the dancing plague in Strasbourg, located on what is now the French border of Germany. 16th century Strasbourg was a cosmopolitan, independent, and prosperous city with over 20,000 inhabitants. Its printing press, cannon foundry, and stunning Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Strasbourg were evidence of its capable government and sophisticated culture, while its proximity to the Rhine River and the Vosges Mountains had made it a center for trade in the Holy Roman Empire since ancient times. Strasbourg was home to Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, and it attracted a diverse array of intellectuals, free thinkers, and religious reformists who contributed to the city's vibrancy. Nevertheless, Strasbourg's citizens were influenced by superstitions, fears, and spiritual beliefs that stood in for certainty when the limited scientific and medical knowledge of the time fell short. Though the city had an enduring history, it had recently suffered a few rough years. Life was precarious. Awful weather and a series of poor harvests had made the days exceedingly difficult for the average person, and an outbreak of syphilis had added an unsavory taint to everyday interactions. Religious and political tensions were on the rise, poverty was increasing, and people were on edge. In the seasons leading up to 1518, many of the pious citizens of Strasbourg believed that they were suffering the wrath of Saint Vitus for their sins, and their anxiety only worsened as time passed. Something had to give, so perhaps it was inevitable that one hot July day, a woman known in town as Frau Trofea would step out into the streets and begin to sway as if some faraway dirge was guiding her movements. It wasn't long before her husband noticed her strange and unseemly behavior, but by then she was too far gone to be stopped or persuaded to come inside. Instead, she began to jig and became ever more agitated as the fiery sun set and the night took over. Frau Trofea eventually fell to the cobblestones with her energy spent, yet by dawn, the mania had roused her and she was overtaken by the dance once more. Word was starting to get out that the woman had lost her mind, and by the next day, she had become a spectacle as curious passers-by stopped to gawk at this once respectable citizen. For the next few days, some said it was 4, others claimed it was 6, Frau Trofea danced far beyond the point of reason, and no one could persuade her to quit. The commotion surrounding her caught the attention of the local Privy Council, which had no intention of encouraging disorderly conduct in an already troubled population. Instead, with the aid of a few enforcers, they managed to overpower the woman, bind her, place her in a wagon, and send her off on a 3-day ride to the shrine of Saint Vitus in nearby Saverne. As far as anyone could tell, the saint had cursed Frau Trofea for some as yet undiscovered lewd behavior. Perhaps she could regain his favor and be cured by his mercy through an act of penance. Unfortunately for the council, the intervention came too late to prevent others from following, quite literally, in Frau Trofea's footsteps. Dozens of townspeople had taken to dancing in the streets, and their numbers were growing. Worse yet, the craze was not an entirely new phenomenon. The region near Strasbourg had been the site of dancing plagues for years, with the first recorded around 1374. Given that medical knowledge at the time was developing and limited, it's no surprise that people would attribute their misfortunes to vengeful saints. Nor would there be much reason for the average person to suspect that falling under the spell of the dance was anything more than a punishment. But was Strasbourg truly cursed or hated by God? Despite the religious sentiment in the city and the hardships people faced, council members had no intention of letting the situation get out of hand. They knew they should try to make things better, and at the very least, they felt obligated to impose and keep order. Although Strasbourg's Guild of Physicians had a rationalist attitude toward the medical ills of the time, their powers of diagnosis were limited. Though they did not credit the outbreak to God's retribution for sin, as the clergy did, and attributed the dancing plague to natural causes, they could only guess what was really going on. Perhaps the blood of the dancers literally ran too hot. Medical theories of the time might have led the doctors to suggest applying leeches to the dancers' bodies. But instead, the physicians suggested that the afflicted would cure themselves if they danced the plague out of their bodies. As a result of the physicians' recommendations, the council decreed that carpenters and tanners should transform their meeting areas into makeshift dance halls and set up publicly visible dance platforms by the horse markets. They hired healthy dancers, musicians, and strongmen to create a festive environment where the afflicted could tire themselves out as they moved to the sounds of drums, fiddles, and horns. While Strasbourg's leaders sought an earthly solution to the illness, the average person was more inclined to attribute the plague to St. Vitus's wrath. Since people were conscious of their own sinful natures, it was easy for them to believe that anyone could succumb to the plague. Perhaps on seeing people they knew or could identify with dancing as if possessed, those with a pious or guilty conscience believed they were next in line and became more susceptible to the fugue. As the summer wore into August, the plague intensified and hundreds of people succumbed to its force. People danced until they dropped, and many dropped dead. It's believed that when the plague was at its worst, about 15 people died each day, although the actual death toll remains a mystery. The council realized that by giving the plague a chance to consume itself, they had actually added fuel to the fire, so they reversed course, pulled down the stages, and banned public dancing until the fall. Burghers urged citizens to mellow their tone at private celebrations by opting for gentle strings instead of lively tambourines. They shifted their message to align with public opinion, saying that perhaps God was angry with the citizens of Strasbourg after all. By this time, rumor had it that Frau Trophea had been cured of her ills, so the council decided that the most addled choreomaniac should be carted off to St. Vitus's shrine. When they arrived at the grotto, priests gave them small crosses to hold and placed red shoes on their bloody feet, which they consecrated with holy water. Only then did the dancers enter the smoky, incense-filled chamber of St. Vitus, as the priest chanted in Latin underneath a wooden carving of his likeness. This mystical ritual seemed to break the curse, and as the weather cooled, the plague subsided like a broken fever. By fall, it was over. Years after the dancing plague of Strasbourg ran its course, Europe's physicians were still discussing its origin. If hot blood and divine wrath were not to blame, what could be the cause? In the 1530s, the acclaimed physician Paracelsus speculated that Strasbourg's plague began as nothing more than a ruse by a fed-up wife to annoy her husband. To be convincing, he said, she made her dance as cringeworthy as possible and committed to it fully. Other women in town noticed and took up the mania out of spite. Paracelsus characterized this dancing as a fearless and provocative chorea lasciva, and named chorea imaginativa and chorea naturalis as variants provoked by rage and a distemper within the body, respectively. In other words, a rash of mental disorders caused the dancing plague. Although Paracelsus's diagnosis was overblown, not to mention misogynist, his instinct was likely on the mark. For whatever reason, the medieval physicians didn't believe that the plague was caused by pathogenic disease, perhaps because it was so enervating. People who exhausted themselves or were able to snap out of the dance seemed to recover quickly. While modern historians have been inclined to look for physical scientific explanations that align with our knowledge of sickness, it's likely these theories are misplaced. Some researchers argued that the dancers could have entered a psychedelic trance state caused by eating rye contaminated by ergot, a mold that can cause hallucinations and uncontrollable movements. Yet because ergot also restricts blood flow to the hands and feet, it would have been physically impossible for dancers to stay upright for days at a time. Today, many people are inclined to attribute the dancing plague to choreomania, a mass psychogenic illness that spread like an extremely unpleasant trend and manifested as an involuntary physical response to extreme stress. Pushed to the brink, people just needed a break, and a confluence of circumstances, summertime heat, cultish spiritual beliefs, and prolonged suffering and fear created the right conditions for an outbreak. The awful toll of relentless hunger and diseases like smallpox made people susceptible to strange behavior. Poor and less educated citizens were inclined toward fanaticism, and any outlet for escape was preferable to the torments of their current reality. Gossip and belief can travel and poison a community, especially during times when reason fails. When life is falling apart, superstition and fear can bind a community together in an ugly way that is ultimately destructive. If enough people believe in something, it can change the overall reality people experience. In Strasbourg, enough people believed that Saint Vitus could punish the wicked by making them dance deliriously, without dignity, to cause an episode of mass hysteria. In a culture where religion was central to everyday life, it was easy to blame the plague on demons or spirits and tacitly encourage its spread to others who shared their beliefs. When spiritual phenomena are taken to be as real and dangerous as the threat of poisoning or a stab wound, people are more likely to suspend their relationship to normal consciousness and then act as their community would expect them to. In this case, since the region had a history of dancing plagues, seeing citizens seemingly lose control of their more sober selves was not a complete surprise. Some might say that the dancing citizens of Strasbourg were taken over by their unconscious or shadow selves, providing their conscious selves with an excuse to act crazy by creating an involuntary state of frenzy. And yet, after the dancing plague ended, it became clear that beliefs were changing in Strasbourg. Superstitions were losing their potency as Europe moved towards the Enlightenment. Once prosperity was restored to the city, the conditions that gave rise to the dancing plague fell away, and the belief systems that had sustained them disappeared as reason took over as a guiding principle. The culture that shaped the expression of suffering in Strasbourg had evolved. Even now, hundreds of years later, people may involuntarily or deliberately dissociate from daily life when they dance during ceremonial events or periods of extreme stress. These ecstatic states alter their perception of pain and exhaustion and offer a kind of respite from daily life. When people consciously and intentionally participate in ecstatic dance, they can enter trance states without pain. Unfortunately, it seems that the victims of the psychogenic mania in 1518 moved as if possessed and without pleasure. Their condition was only reinforced as their neighbors fell prey to their own anxieties. Our digital age is seemingly governed by science, technology, and rationality, yet society is not a machine. Not everything can be explained. People still suffer, and it's easy to be consumed by emotion when a situation feels out of control. Our sanity is fragile and brittle. When life is difficult, we want to come back to stability and wholeness any way we can. Sometimes, when our knowledge and intelligence fail us, our bodies will seek out ways to restore equilibrium, whether we are fully aware of it or not. But when we understand how our minds respond to the threat of disaster, these states are less likely to take over. and people can creatively find ways to overcome chaos.